Beginner series, advanced courses, and everything in between, Cadjunkie brings you the best in Modo, SolidWorks, and Rhino video training ever. On the face of the earth. Ever. Get your premium membership and a leg up on your coworkers at cadjunkie.com.
Adam, if design were a sushi platter, you would be the twitching octopus arms dancing across the plate, drenched in soy sauce and wasabi.
Just the way I like it. Welcome to Engineer vs. Designer.
The podcast.
For product designers,
engineers,
and people who make a living drawing spaceships and concept bikes. My name is Adam.
And my name is Josh. Each week we bring you the freshest product design juice squeezed straight from the lobes of our esteemed guests.
This week we talk with the one and only Scott Robertson,
concept artist,
product designer,
former instructor at Art Center in Pasadena, and founder of publishing company Design Studio Press. Scott also has motion picture experience, having worked on films like Minority Report, among a slew of other side projects.
Wow. Scott Robertson, welcome to the show. Our first question for you, if you could be reincarnated and come back into this world as any product design in history, which product would that be?
Oh, product design in history. Yeah, I was trying to think of, cars fall into products as well, but I might have to go with the new generation. I would probably, I'll pick one from the past and one from, today. I would probably say, I'm going to say typewriter.
Okay.
From the past.
Nice.
Or I'm going to say iPod from our generation.
All right.
Great answer.
No.
I actually would have chosen OxyClean wipes. The wipes.
Disposable.
Not preparation aid.
No, you would, Josh. And speaking of well-designed disposable objects, Josh, moisten our dry, flaky brains with the wet wipes of knowledge. What have you got for us this week?
Well, our guest Scott Robertson is not only a legend in the field of concept art, but he's also an accomplished designer who, after graduating Art Center in 1990, opened up his own consultancy in San Francisco.
And apparently it was there that he jump-started his career with a bunch of different companies, including BMW Design Works,
Nike,
Universal Studios,
Mattel,
Rockstar Games,
Sony,
and a bunch of others. And of course, our concept work like drawthrough.com, which is a site that I love, made him a household name among industrial designers. Scott, what is it like to be Scott Robertson?
It's busy.
I can imagine.
It's busy. It's busy and probably not as glamorous as it might sound.
Really?
So,
wash the dishes and clean the car and stuff.
Yeah, all the same old stuff, and and trying to run the publishing company. So the Design Studio Press responsibilities of running the editorial side on that, and then we're starting up workshops again now in my studio. So. Yeah, it's
well. So what do you? Let's get your plug in here. What are you doing these days? What are you up to?
Well, let's see. My time right now is divided between Design Studio Press responsibilities, so running that company, and we have 48 books in print now, and we're number 49 and 50 are going to press on Monday.
Wow!
Congrats.
We have another 12 planned over the next year. So this time next year we'll be to 60 titles.
Wow! I am going to go broke because of you guys.
You got to come to one of my workshops. You can get them all half off.
All right.
There you go. Well, among so many great guests we've had on our show, and because we love concept art so dang much, we're absolutely delighted to have you on the show with us. So, Scott, you grew up in rural Oregon, I believe, and your father was an illustrator. At what point did you realize that you were going to be a concept artist / designer? How did you end up going down to Pasadena?
Well, my dad actually went to Art Center in the early 60s in the illustration department.
Oh.
And so I sort of always knew about Art Center. And I think had my dad done it over again, he probably would have gone in the industrial design program, because he ended up designing a lot of homes that we built as a family, and we did all sorts of projects that were very much of the industrial design realm. Building, like we did, built soapbox derby cars forever. We did that. That was cool. A big family activity. And they weren't, it's not like soapbox style at that time. It was full, airfoil forms, with fiberglass inside and out, full suspension, super precise building, techniques. So that was really where probably my passion for cars came from, was building a lot of those things. And then since I already knew about Art Center, wasn't much of a jump to, come down, visit the school, and then prepare a portfolio. But I did go to Oregon State for a couple of years to see if there was anything else I liked more than pursuing a career, in the visual arts. And there wasn't.
Well, so one thing I wonder about is, obviously it runs in the family. You learn this from your dad, presumably, is at least some of it. And I just wonder, at least for me, when I went to school, I went to art school as well. And when I did that, I found that art was a lot less fun. It became my job, so I needed a different hobby. Is this still your hobby, or do you do something else as well?
I think it's still my hobby. It's actually what I would prefer to do with my spare time.
Oh, yeah. That's a good place to be.
Yeah, the tools have become quite different. And I think it's because of the entertainment angle. And I also have an outlet because of the books. So when I go and spend free time, say, creating doing a bunch of spaceship sketches or something, I always know that I can put those aside and that at some point I'll drop them into a book. So I can almost semi-justify, right, spending personal time and doing hobby stuff that the parts of the creative process that I enjoy the most, and knowing that I can document that and then try to renew, or sort of recoup some of those expenses of that time investment.
Wow.
And draw through is the hobby side of it?
Yeah, well, no, that's kind of like an archive site of personal and professional work. But there's a lot of professional work on there. And that's kind of the archive. Uh-huh. The more running experimental stuff is on my blog. So it's just drawthrough.blogspot.
Uh-huh.
And so that's where the experimental stuff gets documented.
Drawthrough.blogspot.com, I'm assuming. So yeah, we'll have to check that out.
Yeah, so that's where doing a lot of stuff over the last year with Moto. So.
Oh, right, yeah.
So doing a lot of that sort of 3D sketching and rapid viz things that are a little bit outside normal model building and rendering exercises for people. So that's kind of fun to do.
Well, all the Motonauts out there are going to want to check that out for sure. And Scott, I cannot wait to hear more about your background, your books, all that stuff. But Josh, right now, is being attacked by angry ninja honeybees at the moment. So we're going to be right back. Okay, so Scott, before we get into that deep, thought-provoking interview segment, we wanted to get your thoughts on a new idea that we have.
Yes, just a second here. Let me think of this. Oh, yes, this is the segment where we get your input on a brilliant idea that we have. Yes.
A possibly brilliant idea. It's a cool idea we came up with over limoncello last week. Yeah.
Yeah. Scott Robertson, we think you should illustrate a concept art book called
The Milkman.
It's all about a high-tech milkman from the future.
Can that happen? Would you illustrate that book for us?
What do you think?
Milkman from the future. Actually, compared to a lot of books we already have, that's actually not much of a stretch. So,
a futuristic milk truck, the whole.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch. We'll have our people contact your people about that. But it does make me wonder about the font from which your ideas flow. I mean, every designer out there, myself included, has seen your stuff and said, "Daggone it, why can't I do that?" And then tried and failed to come up with ideas worth seeing. So being able to draw really well is the price of entry for what you do, I think. But you have great ideas worth drawing. Yeah. I think that's the critical distinction here. So, Scott, how do you approach a brief? What sort of process do you go through to find inspiration?
Well, the inspiration side of it probably has to do a lot with other disciplines beyond the classic ones you use. So things like photography and travel, reading, those sort of things help a lot to get you away from the tool sets you normally use and help you see other images. So I think exposure is good, so that you get travel and also doing other exercises. And so you can find a lot of inspiration that way. I happen to be very fortunate that I'm in Southern California, and if I ever really get stuck, I have an amazing group of peers that I can go have lunch with any one of them and they're always doing something, super impressive. So that if you're ever stuck, you can always go and visit a friend and have them, inspire you to get out of your funk and start doing cool stuff again. So
So there are perks to being Scott Robertson, is what you're saying.
I don't know about that, but I think that you can do it anywhere, right? I mean, you can do, and now you can do it via the internet. So you can go and have a blog roll that you visit every day. It's kind of like the same as me having friends with all those same people that have those blogs. It's once removed, but I think you can find that same sort of inspiration. So I think that's one way. And then on the sort of like the nuts and bolts of it and actually getting down to doing it, I love process, and I love to try and reinvent the process all the time. So it means trying to find other ways to create imagery and create designs that I wouldn't normally do. So a lot of times I don't start with drawings. I might start with photography, or I might start with a 3D modeling program, or I might start with a physical model and a lump of clay. So if you try to always reinvent the way you're working, you inevitably, because the tools are different, you you infuse your process with new things that you never have done before.
Wow.
And so, and then I have a whole like lateral thinking checklist that I go through when I do styling.
Tell me about that. Tell me about the checklist.
So, yeah, the checklist is something I've been working on for a while. And it was, I had to come up with it because I was challenged to teach a class, basically to teach industrial designers about the design process and how you actually do industrial design. And of course, you start with the normal things that if you're given a marketing brief, right, you can explain all of that. But it was really, you get a brief, you go out, you do the field research, you compile the research, you try to find, you do lateral thinking exercises to come up with creative solutions to those problems you define. But beyond that, then how do you tackle something subjective like styling? And so my checklist is really about the styling side, because so much of the entertainment work is styling first and function maybe, right? So, So I have it. So I've come up with this thing. It's kind of a proximity-based styling approach. So it starts when, and you can apply it to all industrial design projects as well. It's like you walk into a showroom and you see a car from a distance, or you see a shoe on a wall, right? And so that's the distance read. And so when you're far away, what draws you in? And, if you're looking at a car across a parking lot and you can't see the details, it's usually proportion, stance, and silhouette. So I design these gates. So when I do thumbnail sketching, I try to find an interesting silhouette, proportion, and stance before I go to the next thing that arrives as you take a step closer to that object. So as your proximity diminishes towards the object, new things become apparent. And so my list, and they can change in order too, depending on what the object is. So there are some objects that you never see from a distance. You only see them when you're holding them in your hand. And so at that point, maybe the distance read is secondary to the graphics, for instance.
So when we're working on our milkman concept storyline, we'll be thinking very much about the silhouettes of the figures relative to the vehicles.
Exactly, right. So you got to get all that stuff first. So it's about, so my categories are, first usually is always silhouette, proportion, and stance. Then there's value graphics. Value graphics are what I lump into, if you're looking at an object from across the way and it has a dark spot on it, you don't know if the dark spot is actually a hole or if it's just a painted dark spot.
Okay.
So
you're just composing in space. You're composing visual elements in space.
Right. Yeah. So for instance, this would be like window graphics. So for instance, if I had if I was designing a black limousine with black windows, I would say I could pretty much ignore the value graphics of that product. Right? Because it's black on black. So therefore the shape and the contrast between those two elements, I don't have to worry about the shape of them because they're going to be way, way, way down the priority list. Whereas if it's a white limousine with black windows, now from a distance, what becomes almost the most important thing, right, from a styling standpoint,
shape of those windows. Okay.
Bingo. So now, if you know that from the beginning, and you know that your object's going to be high contrast or have a lot of value graphics, then you better put more time into that before you go to things like transitional forms. And transitional forms, you have to be even closer, and you have to have the light has to be in the right way in order to see the radiuses and the silhouettes and those sort of things.
Absolutely.
But in flat light on a foggy day, you don't see that stuff. So other things become more important. And then there's infographics, which are like on-off switches, advertising, model names, maker, that sort of stuff. Then there's line graphics. Line graphics can be design lines or cut lines. And there's materials. But a lot of times some products are offered in only one material. Other times they're offered in multiples. So that helps you. It always helps you. It just helps you to build a hierarchy of where you should be spending your time. Arriving at a nice solution before you go do the next thing. And the last one is tactile feedback.
The last one?
Tactile feedback.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because then you finally get close enough that you reach out and you touch the object, and then there has to be, what are you bringing that's special, that part of the experience?
That's fantastic.
That is wonderful insight. We'll talk more on it in just a bit. Stay tuned next week where we will discuss another amazing idea.
So today, as you know, we are talking concept art with the dojo master alien from outer space, Scott Robertson. It's from alien portraits to bike frames to spaceships and mechs. Scott, how much time do you spend designing physical products as opposed to just concept art?
Not that much lately.
To
be honest. No, I haven't done. I sort of, at a certain part of my career, I actually didn't want to make any more stuff. So I sort of got tired of making stuff. So I had I've done about 25 bicycle helmets in production and like a dozen bicycle frames and, a lot of stuff basically. And you'd see it all over the place, but at a certain point it just became the same process. Yeah. And the experience was, to be honest, getting to be not that much fun because it was always faster, always cheaper, right? So deadlines were quicker. You invent a new way to work faster. You as a designer don't usually benefit. You roll that right into the production pipeline gets to be shorter. But by working creatively, you don't get to have a better, quality of life or work experience. So, at a certain point, I thought that, and I also realized that my favorite part of the process was the front end. So doing things for like a video game, let's say I really love designing cars, right? But I want to do things that are a little bit more thematic. And I don't really say I love designing cars, but I don't believe in them as products because they're dirty and they burn oil, right, et cetera. So how can I still get to do the part of the process that I really love as an industrial designer without the back end of it being ever built? And so the answer to that was doing concept work for video games, right? So you could actually go build an experience and design all the stuff for an entire world. And then when it's done and people have experienced those, seemingly physical objects, they just flip the switch and it all goes away. So in a way, I get to do all the same front end work that you do in classic industrial design projects, but without them being actually physically made.
So as a concept artist in the digital age here, how have the digital tools helped? Do you still prefer the number 2 pencil versus a stylus? Or has digital illustration hurt the craft of, coming up with that idea and expanding on it?
I've got to say, the digital tools are pretty sexy nowadays. They really are. I mean, I've explored them quite a bit in the last couple of years, like I mentioned with Streamoto, and there are things that I can create with those tools that I can't draw. So, that being said, it opens up new possibilities. So I think it's actually advanced the industry, and it's advanced creativity. So I think that having more tools is never a problem. And at the end of the day, they are just tools, and you still have to find creative ways to use them. But the way they can be used creatively now is where I think we're just scratching the surface of that versus how much more creatively can you use a marker and a pencil and, gouache. I think that's been pretty exploited. So I think the new ground for styling and creativity probably lives, a lot of times now in a computer.
Every designer went through hurdles when learning how to sketch, I'm pretty sure. Very few people are born with a pencil in their hand. And you've obviously been doing this for a very long time, since a young age, but clearly you had to learn to do this at some point. So how did you overcome challenges? And do you think anybody can do this? Can anybody learn to do this competently? Or is this inborn and you either tap into it or you don't?
Well, I used to think when I was starting teaching, like 17 years ago, that would teach anybody how to draw competently. But I will say that I've run into a few individuals since then that have made me change my mind on that one. It just, and it doesn't have to do with the physical act of making a line and connecting dots. It has to do with visualizing what's in front of them and being able to translate that into two-dimensional representation or the illusion of three dimensions. But it's that thing of being able to, even drawing from observation and being able to understand the thing in three dimensions and seeing converging lines, going to this, mystical vanishing point. That sort of stuff, it takes a certain level of visualization skills that you can develop those, and drawing is a great way to help you develop those, and there are definitely techniques in developing that sequence to a high level, but there are some people that just don't have that gene. But if you do, then you can, of course, do the right sequencing and educational paths and curriculum. Everybody can master those skills. So, it's tough.
Well, you're known for your sketch technique, as is seen on your site, drawthrough.com, and on the blog. You're also exploring the realms, as you mentioned, with Modo. How do you approach 2D versus 3D?
2D now, probably the part of the process that's gotten streamlined and cut out for me a lot is the final line drawing. So I think that the 2D is where you come up with the ideas. And so I always like to enter, not always, but a lot of times, if it's a regular fee job, I like to enter the computer with intent. So I like to go in knowing I have a plan. I want to just, unless it's total free-form exploration and it's still, complete happy accidents, but I usually like to have a plan. So you don't waste a lot of time and you don't, flounder when you hit the 3D part of it. So I think that it's much easier to think on paper and get your ideas down. But the line drawing part of it has kind of gone away in regards to super tight line drawing that you're going to scan and do a final Photoshop rendering of. Right. Because now you can block out something in 3D so fast, especially if you know where you're going and you have a good base sketch, which can be totally out of perspective and just has to be a good idea. And so I find it liberating to, on the drawing side, think only about ideas and not about presentation. And so
I'm like you, Scott. I work in 2D. At least I like to do my creative work in 2D and then jump into 3D once I have some intent. But there are lots of folks, increasingly these days, who don't and who prefer to just jump straight into 3D. And on the one hand, I, like a lot of people, tend to poo-poo that and say, well, you really should be working in 2D because it's faster early on. But for some people, 3D works really well for ideation. So I'm really wondering, do you think that that's maybe a generational thing? Do you think it's just a skill set thing?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. Because some of the 3D skills, 3D programs, you can do 2D within them. Like take like ZBrush, right? I mean, you can do fantastic things. And if you're really, but there's something about the traditional media training that really helps with your pre-visualization skills.
Yeah.
So let's say, for instance, you're going to draw with a black Sharpie, right? Mm-hmm. If you're going to draw with a black Sharpie, it forces you into a mental process of pre-visualizing before you put a permanent black ink mark on a white piece of paper.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that exercise, and also using things like gouache or permanent markers, those sort of things. And so it, I think, trains a part of your brain to pre-visualize your results before you actually put them down. Because there are certain tools that you can't really make. It's hard to find that spark of inspiration or a moment of discovery when the tool is so foreboding, right? Like a big, fat, sharp black marker, right? So if you can, you have to like pause for a moment before you commit to that. And that little pause, I think it works some parts of your brain and trains that muscle to pre-visualize. And so I think then when you jump into 3D and you do that sort of thing, and it's totally intuitive and you don't even recognize it, but you're able to be slightly one step ahead, and you're expecting things to go the way they should when you block things out. So I've seen a lot of people make the transition, and a lot of people that have great foundation skills in drawing and painting and sculpting make a really seamless transition into using the 3D tools. But a lot of people I've seen that did 3D only and never built things with their hands, for instance, right? They have a difficult time. So it's really more about, can you build things? Because when I draw, it's not about illustration, it's about model building. Right? Because I'm drawing with cross sections, I'm drawing through the shape like it's invisible. It's like drawing wireframes, right? So that's really pre-visualizing and model building, and that's really the exercise. It's really not drawing for the two-dimensional effect or two-dimensional outcome, even though that's what it is. It's really drawing in 3 dimensions on a two-dimensional piece of paper. And so that really, if you learn to draw that way, it's really just like you're building computer models.
This is great insight. It makes sense why you teach a lot of this. And you've been working at Art Center for a few years now. Of course, you went there, went to school there, your father as well. How do you approach the curriculum when teaching these up-and-coming designers and concept artists?
So I taught at Art Center for 15 or 17 years, and then I was the chair of the new entertainment design program for about 5, and then I resigned about 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So I'm no longer there. They need to update their website. But but I did design that curriculum. So 32 studio classes over a 4-year period. And it was all concept design. The entire program's concept design for 4 straight years.
Wow.
And you design everything. It's basically world building, right? So you do environments, characters, vehicles, and props, which covers everything. So in crafting that, it really is about 6 terms. It's an 8-term program. So it's like 6 terms or 3 academic years worth of foundation disciplines. And then really in the last year, you build an incredible portfolio. So it's like, say, 3 years of foundation rendering and drawing, right? And then in addition to that, it's another 3 years on sequencing through design techniques and methodologies. So it's all the stuff I've been talking about, and just putting it all in the right sequence to support all of those different subjects. So, I mean, effectively, it's just world building, and it's everything in an imaginary world, which, to be honest, is what industrial design is. You know, you're imagining an end user without using a product nobody in the world has never seen before, working a lot of times in a way that's never been used before or experienced. So I think the methodologies from industrial design perfectly overlay on top of, the entertainment world. What you need in addition to that, you need amazing illustration skills with it. So you have to put the two together.
I mean, you worked with a lot of really amazing people on some amazing projects. I'll just grab a random example. Why don't you tell us a little bit about working on Minority Report, for example? What's it like working for Steven Spielberg? Did you read the book first? How did you approach it?
No, I never even worked directly with him. It was just, I was an outside expert on a certain subject they wanted, because they needed a wheelchair, they needed bikes. And then, so I worked with a fantastic production designer by the name of Alex McDowell. And so he's a great production designer. And I had friends who were working full-time in the art department, and then I was outside the art department. And we did, some fun bikes, which was incredible. And that's actually I will say the one thing that I did experience with that was the desire, and now it's very commonplace, of all the big directors and movie makers. They want to see things photoreal. So when you show concepts, you're showing your finished concept, even for the first time, in a photoreal rendering. So that's really where they want to see what it's going to look like in the finished film, even the first time they see it, to critique it. They're not looking at sketches. A lot of times people don't. There are directors that do, but a lot of them want to see it, full color, finished photoreal. So that was where I really started to get more heavily into doing the photoreal Photoshop renderings.
Well, now you have worked with Sid Mead, right? He's an alumni of Art Center too. Did movies worked on movies like Blade Runner, Aliens. Did you find that you both had similar processes for coming up with new ideas?
Yeah, a lot of the guys do. They're all. It's very much it's oddly enough. It's really industrial design as a methodology applied to world building. So, and that's kind of the default process that we use. And a lot of times on a big movie, you'll have a research department And it's very much like a student going out and making their style boards and researching trends and, making predictions on the future.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll have, Minority Report, I think, had a panel of futurists that, Stephen organized, and then the guys that were full-time art department, took all the information from those futurists and tried to incorporate it into making that, vision of the future. It's really what you do for any big company, right? So you would go and you'd maybe have an advisory board of futurists for technologies and experiences, et cetera, and you would, cull through all that information and try to distill it into a product that works for your client.
You have done so much in your career already, and clearly there's a lot more a career left for you at this point. Where do you see yourself heading in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, the next stuff that's big for us is I'm trying to finish 3 educational books, which is putting all the stuff I've been talking about on our talk today into all the stuff I taught for 17 years in 3 books, which will be out hopefully next June. And then we are taking a lot of that content and putting it into our new iPad app, which has been a big focus for the last year. So we're creating a new iPad app.
Design Studio Press. That's going to be it.
Design Studio. Well, I actually formed a new company with Rob Baldwin and called NeoBooks. And NeoBooks is a company that is basically a technology company, and we're creating its own ecosystem for looking at books, tutorials. Has an embedded movie player. It's got some great book bells and whistles that are different. And we're also opening up.
That is fantastic.
So we're making that also available for people to self-publish. So anybody around the world that wants to post their book on an iPad, but in a sexier way than anybody else has done before, will be able to do that. And we're about, a couple months away from our soft launch.
That is so exciting. I cannot wait to see that. Scott Robertson, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Having you on the show has been even more fun than the time Josh blew up his microwave while melting crayons wrapped in aluminum foil. Thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
That's it, folks. If you'd like to send your kick-butt concept art to EVDHQ, please address that to Josh, please.
And if you'd like to send spare cases of Prismacolor pencils, please address that to Josh as well.
I would love that.
Best comment this week wins an Engineer vs. Designer t-shirt and sticker pack. Tell us what you think at EngineerVsDesigner.com.
And if you'd like to see us try on shoes for 45 minutes each hour, be sure to like us, +1 us, tweet us, or whatever else as social media has been correlated. We're exploring the most exciting parts of life 140 characters at a time.
The show was edited by Simon Martin. Our theme music is by the Red Hook Ramblers this week.
We'll see you next week, and remember, drinking too much coffee, there's actually no such thing.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right.
Refill? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. That's some good bean.
Learn how to create complex surfaces in SolidWorks, tricks to tap the depths of Modo, video training that takes you further into the software and gets you up to speed faster. Sign up for free, grab a premium membership, and get the best training. Cadjunkie.com.
A production of EBD Media.